Episode 55, Obtain Authority to Operate Through Evidence and Assurance, we focus on the journey from "we believe this system is secure" to a formal decision that says this system may run in production under known conditions. That decision is often called Authority to Operate, ATO, and it sits at the intersection of technical controls, risk reasoning, and organizational accountability. Rather than treating ATO as a mysterious box ticked shortly before go-live, we approach it as a structured translation of security reality into credible authorization backed by verifiable evidence. For an exam candidate, understanding this translation is essential because payment systems frequently operate under both internal and external authorization expectations. When you can explain how evidence supports a decision, your influence extends well beyond configuration details. A disciplined ATO effort starts by identifying the governing frameworks, assessors, stakeholders, and explicit thresholds for authorization. Governing frameworks might include the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI-DSS, internal security policies, and sector-specific regulations that define minimum expectations. Assessors can be internal independent teams, qualified security assessors, QSA, or other recognized third parties whose opinions carry formal weight. Stakeholders range from business owners and technology leaders to compliance officers and external partners who rely on the system's integrity. Clarifying these players and the specific conditions under which authorization will be granted or withheld prevents surprises later and anchors the entire process in shared expectations. Once the governance landscape is clear, you define control scope, inheritance, and system boundaries in ways that both engineers and assessors can understand. Scope decisions capture which components, environments, and data flows fall under the authorization, including supporting services and shared infrastructure that contribute to the risk picture. Inheritance describes which controls are provided by underlying platforms, cloud providers, or shared services, and which must be implemented locally within the system. Boundaries are documented using diagrams and short narratives that show where data enters and leaves, where trust zones change, and where responsibilities shift between teams or suppliers. When this story is coherent, every later control discussion has a concrete backdrop, rather than a vague, "it is in scope" assertion. With scope and boundaries in hand, you build an evidence plan that maps controls to artifacts, owners, and cadences. Each control, whether it involves access management, encryption, logging, or change control, should have a small set of expected evidence types that demonstrate it is both designed and operating effectively. Artifacts might include configuration exports, test reports, screenshots, ticket histories, or signed approvals, and each is assigned to a responsible owner who ensures it remains current. Cadence is important because some evidence must be refreshed frequently, while other items change only when architecture shifts. By assembling this plan early, you avoid last-minute scrambles to invent proof when an assessor asks basic questions. Collecting evidence then becomes a deliberate activity rather than a frantic search through shared folders and email threads. Attestations from suppliers and internal teams, test results from security and functional exercises, approvals from change boards, and logs that demonstrate ongoing operation all belong in defined, tamper-evident repositories. These repositories might be specialized governance tools or carefully controlled document stores, but they share properties of controlled access, versioning, and audit trails. Evidence should be labeled clearly so that any reader can see which control it supports, what period it covers, and who vouches for its accuracy. When evidence is curated this way, the ATO discussion shifts from belief to traceable fact. Before inviting independent assessors to review the system, You perform readiness reviews that simulate their perspective as honestly as possible. These reviews examine the evidence plan, the collected artifacts, and the current risk register to see whether there are visible gaps or unclear stories. Where controls are partially implemented, you document the residual risk, proposed remediation, and any compensating controls that lessen the impact in the interim. This is also the moment to ensure that exceptions are documented with rationale rather than silently accepted through habit. A thorough readiness review allows the organization to fix obvious issues on its own terms rather than discovering them first in a formal report. Independent assessments then provide the external lens that gives ATO its credibility. Coordinating these assessments involves scheduling, scoping, and supplying access to environments, documentation, and key personnel in a structured way. Assessors will often sample systems, configurations, and evidence rather than reviewing every detail, so you must be ready to support demonstrations and follow-up questions transparently. The tone of these interactions matters. When teams respond defensively or obscurely, trust erodes, while candid acknowledgement of weaknesses paired with improvement plans builds confidence. A smooth assessment is rarely one with no findings. It is one where findings are clearly explained, grounded in evidence, and connected to realistic remediation paths. Every finding from an assessment must enter a disciplined remediation and verification cycle. Findings should be recorded in the same tracking systems used for other work, with severity, owners, due dates, and dependencies captured clearly. As fixes are implemented, new evidence is collected that demonstrates the changes, such as updated configurations, new test results, or revised procedures. Verification is more than a quick retest. It checks that the underlying cause has been addressed and that related controls still behave as expected. Assurance statements are then updated to reflect this new reality, ensuring that the ATO decision is based on current, not theoretical, control status. Preparing authorization packages is where all of this material is shaped into a coherent decision support set. These packages typically include executive summaries that translate technical conditions into business-relevant language, matrices that map controls to evidence and standards, and indexes that point precisely to the artifacts behind each claim. The package should make it easy for an authorizing official to see the overall risk posture, the major strengths, and the significant residual risks that remain. Traceability is central. Anyone reading the package should be able to move from an assurance statement to the supporting control and down to the exact evidence file without getting lost. When packages are prepared with this care, authorization becomes a reasoned choice rather than a leap of faith. Some risks will remain even after strong controls and diligent remediation, and those require explicit risk acceptance decisions. Risk acceptances should specify which risk is being tolerated, why immediate remediation is not feasible, and what mitigating conditions reduce the likelihood or impact. Each acceptance must be time-boxed, with an expiration date after which the decision is revisited, and should include triggers that force earlier review if conditions change, such as new vulnerabilities or incidents. These records must be as formal as other authorization artifacts, not casual emails buried in an inbox. Authority to operate is not a one-time pronouncement, which is why continuous monitoring is essential. You define indicators that reflect ongoing control health, such as patch latency, vulnerability counts on critical assets, incident trends, and coverage of key logs or alerts. Reporting rhythms turn these indicators into scheduled views for stakeholders, whether through dashboards, periodic briefings, or written summaries. Escalation thresholds define when deviations in these indicators demand action, ranging from focused investigations to reconsideration of the ATO itself. Continuous monitoring keeps authorization decisions feathered to changing realities rather than frozen at the moment of the initial assessment. Change control sits alongside continuous monitoring as a guardrail for authorization integrity. Significant changes in architecture, technology stack, data flows, business processes, or regulatory context can all alter the basis on which ATO was originally granted. Maintaining disciplined change records and linking them to risk and control analysis allows the organization to decide when a full or partial reauthorization is required. Some changes may trigger targeted reassessments, while others may justify revisiting scope or compensating control assumptions. When change control and authorization are connected, the organization avoids running systems on outdated risk stories. A short mental review of this episode's themes reveals a full life cycle of evidence-driven authorization. You begin by defining scope, frameworks, and thresholds. Then map controls to concrete artifacts and curate those artifacts in controlled repositories. Readiness reviews and independent assessments challenge your assumptions, while remediation cycles and risk acceptances shape the final posture. Authorization packages and continuous monitoring keep decisions visible and current, with change control ensuring that major shifts are reflected in updated assurance. Together, these practices turn ATO from a bureaucratic hurdle into a living expression of how security, risk, and business objectives meet. The practical conclusion for episode 55 is to translate this structure into an immediate planning step. Drafting an evidence map for one important system, even at a rough level, forces you to connect controls, artifacts, owners, and review cadences in concrete terms. From there, scheduling a readiness review with the right mix of technical, risk, and business participants gives that map a chance to be challenged and refined before any formal assessment. This small sequence demonstrates how security reality can be prepared for credible authorization rather than assumed. For an exam candidate, leading such preparation is a powerful indicator of readiness to operate in high-assurance environments. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.